The town sat quietly between open fields and long dirt roads, a place where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else. People there measured life by seasons, not by clocks. Mornings began with the sound of birds, the smell of fresh soil, and the distant lowing of cattle. Everyone knew everyone, and most families had lived there for generations. It was the kind of town where doors were rarely locked and strangers were noticed immediately. At the edge of the town stood a large ranch that stretched farther than most people could walk in a day. The land had been passed down through one family for decades. The rancher who owned it now was a man in his late 40s, strong from years of physical work and shaped by the sun and wind. He was known as a man of few words, someone who believed actions mattered more than talk. To many in town, he represented the old ways: hard work, independence, and pride in one's land. From a young age, he had learned the ranch was more than property. It was history. His father had taught him how to care for animals, how to respect the land, and how to survive when times were hard. His grandfather's stories still lived in his memory, stories of droughts, storms, and sacrifices that kept the ranch alive. Losing the land was never an option in his mind. Protecting it was his duty. Most days followed the same routine. He woke before sunrise, checked the fences, fed the animals, and worked until the sky turned orange and purple in the evening. The work was exhausting, but it gave his life purpose. The ranch paid the bills, but more importantly, it gave him identity. Without it, he did not know who he would be. The town respected him for that. People trusted him, waved when they passed his truck, and spoke highly of him at local gatherings. When problems arose, his opinion mattered. He had helped neighbors during bad seasons and donated quietly when families struggled. He never asked for praise, and that made people respect him even more. But beneath the calm surface of the town, change was slowly approaching. New ideas, new interests, and new plans were being discussed in meetings and private conversations. Some people wanted progress, believing it would bring jobs and opportunities. Others feared change would erase the town's identity. The rancher stood firmly in the middle of these conversations. Even when he did not speak openly about it, pressure began to build quietly. Letters arrived. Visitors from outside the town showed interest in land nearby. There were talks of development, new roads, and new projects that could bring money but also disturb the land. The rancher listened, but he did not rush to respond. He believed patience was strength. At the same time, someone close to him began to notice the weight he was carrying. She had known him for years and understood his stubborn nature as well as his sense of responsibility. She could see that something was troubling him, even though he rarely shared his worries. In quiet moments, she tried to talk to him, asking questions gently, hoping he would open up. He would often look out over the land before answering, as if the fields themselves held the truth. When he did speak, his words were careful. He said times were changing and that survival sometimes required hard choices. He believed he was protecting the ranch's future, even if others might not understand yet. The woman felt uneasy. She knew the town well and understood how deeply people cared about the land and the traditions tied to it. She sensed that whatever decision the rancher was considering could affect more than just him. It could touch every family, every memory, and every shared value in the town. As weeks passed, the tension grew. Small signs appeared: quiet disagreements, worried looks at community gatherings, whispers that stopped when someone walked by. The town still looked peaceful, but something had shifted. People were holding their breath without realizing it. The rancher felt it too. Though he stayed busy, the weight of responsibility followed him everywhere. At night, sleep came slowly. He replayed old lessons from his father in his mind, reminding himself that a leader must be strong, even when it hurts. He believed that being firm was the same as being right. Still, the land remained beautiful. Sunlight spread across the fields each morning. Animals moved calmly through familiar paths, and the ranch stood as it always had. To an outsider, nothing seemed wrong, but those who knew the town well could feel the quiet before a storm. Part 1 of the story closes with that silence, an uneasy calm filled with unspoken worries. The rancher stands on his land, confident yet conflicted, while the town around him waits unknowingly for a decision that will change everything. The days that followed felt heavier than before, as if the air itself carried worry. The rancher continued his routine, but those close to him could tell something had changed. He worked longer hours, stayed quiet during meals, and spent more time standing alone, looking across his land. His eyes followed the fences, the fields, and the distant hills, as if he were measuring something only he could see. The woman who cared about him deeply noticed every small change. She had known him long enough to understand that when he became this silent, his mind was locked on a difficult choice. One evening, as the sun lowered and painted the sky in soft colors, she decided she could not stay quiet anymore. She met him near the barn, where the animals were settling for the night. She spoke gently at first, asking how he was feeling. He answered in short words, saying he was fine and tired from work. But she did not step away. She told him she could see the weight he was carrying, and that pretending everything was normal would not make the problem disappear. Her voice was calm, but her concern was clear. Slowly, he admitted that he was under pressure. Costs were rising, weather had become less predictable, and maintaining the ranch was getting harder each year. He said he had been offered a solution, one that could secure his future and keep the ranch running, at least in his mind. He did not share all the details, but enough for her to understand that the decision would change the land forever. Her expression shifted from concern to fear. She reminded him that the ranch was not just his. It was part of the town's soul. Families had grown up seeing those fields, working beside him, and trusting that the land would remain as it always had. She warned him that people would not see his decision as practical or smart. They would see it as a betrayal. He listened, but his jaw tightened. He said people did not understand the pressure he was under. They did not see the bills, the risks, or the sleepless nights. He believed that if he did nothing, the ranch could be lost completely. To him, making a hard choice now felt better than losing everything later. She pleaded with him to slow down. She asked him to talk to the town, to explain his struggles, and to look for other options. She reminded him of the respect people had for him and how much his voice mattered. She believed that if he involved others, they could find a solution together. But the rancher believed leadership meant standing alone. He had grown up hearing that a man must carry his burdens quietly and protect what was his, no matter the cost. He worried that opening up would show weakness and invite interference. In his mind, this decision was his responsibility and his alone. As word began to spread that something was coming, the town grew restless. People noticed unfamiliar visitors driving slowly along the roads, stopping to look at the land. Whispers filled the local store and coffee shop. No one knew the full story, but everyone felt uneasy. The woman tried again, this time with more emotion. She told him directly that going forward would cause pain he could not undo. She spoke about neighbors who trusted him, about children who grew up believing the land would always be there, and about the damage that could be done to relationships that took decades to build. Her words landed heavily, but they did not change his mind. He believed that people would eventually understand. He told her that time would prove him right, and that anger would fade once they saw the benefits. He convinced himself that short-term pain was worth long-term survival. The distance between them grew. Conversations became shorter, and the warmth they once shared cooled. She felt helpless, watching him move forward, knowing she had done all she could to stop him. He felt misunderstood and alone. Even while surrounded by familiar faces, town meetings became tense. Even though nothing had been officially announced, people argued about change, about tradition, and about who had the right to decide the town's future. The rancher often stayed silent during these gatherings, his calm presence only adding to the mystery. At night, he questioned himself more than he admitted. Doubt crept in during quiet moments, but pride pushed it away. He reminded himself of his father's lessons about strength and sacrifice. He believed he was being brave by moving forward, even as the woman's words echoed in his mind. Part 2 ends with a moment of stillness. The woman stands on the porch of her home, watching the lights of the ranch in the distance, fearing what is to come. The rancher, alone on his land, prepares to take the next step, unaware that the plea he ignored will soon become a painful truth for everyone involved. The decision did not arrive loudly. There were no big announcements at first, no public speeches, and no warnings to prepare the town. It began quietly, almost politely, as if the change hoped to slip in without being noticed. One morning, unfamiliar vehicles appeared near the ranch. They moved slowly, stopping often, taking notes, measuring distances, and marking spots on the ground. At first, people assumed it was routine work, but deep down, many already knew something serious was happening. The rancher watched from a distance. He kept his face calm and his posture steady, the way he always did. Inside, his thoughts raced. This was the moment he had been preparing for. The moment he believed would secure his future and protect what remained of his land. He told himself again that this was necessary. He repeated it like a promise, hoping it would silence the doubt rising in his chest. By midday, word had spread across the town. People gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices. Some walked closer to the ranch to see for themselves. Others stood outside the local store, shaking their heads in disbelief. No one wanted to believe the rumors, but the signs were clear. Something permanent was being set into motion. The woman heard the news from a neighbor. She froze where she stood, feeling a deep heaviness settle inside her. Though she had feared this moment, its arrival still felt unreal. She rushed toward the ranch, her heart pounding with every step. When she saw the markings on the land and the strangers moving freely where only cattle once stood, her fear turned into pain. She found the rancher near the edge of the field. He did not look surprised to see her. In fact, he seemed to expect it. She asked him quietly if the rumors were true. He nodded once, without meeting her eyes. That small movement felt louder than any argument they had ever had. She told him it was not too late. She begged him to stop, even now. She said people were already upset, confused, and hurt. She reminded him of every warning she had given, every concern he had dismissed. Her voice shook, not from anger, but from sadness. He listened, but his decision had hardened. He told her contracts were signed and plans were moving forward. Backing out now would only make things worse. He believed that once everything was completed, the town would adjust. He said change always felt painful at first. She looked at him and realized that, in this moment, he was more alone than ever before. Not because people had left him, but because he had closed himself off. She turned away, knowing her words could no longer reach him. The reaction from the town grew quickly. By evening, anger replaced confusion. People felt ignored and disrespected. They believed decisions that affected everyone should have been discussed openly. Longtime neighbors felt betrayed, especially those who had trusted the rancher for years. Some people defended him, saying it was his land and his right to choose. But even they struggled to explain why everything had been done in silence. The lack of communication hurt almost as much as the decision itself. Meetings were called, voices were raised, and emotions ran high. Stories were shared about childhood memories tied to the land, learning to ride horses, family picnics, and helping during harvest seasons. To many, the ranch was not just land, it was part of who they were. The rancher stayed away from these gatherings. He believed facing the crowd would only lead to arguments and regret. He focused instead on the work ahead, telling himself that results would speak louder than words. Still, every angry look and whispered comment followed him like a shadow. Even those who once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. The friendly waves disappeared. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. The respect he had built over decades began to fade in a matter of days. He felt it deeply, though he never showed it. At night, the ranch no longer felt peaceful. The familiar sounds of animals and wind through the fields were joined by the noise of machines and unfamiliar voices. Sleep became difficult. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the woman's pleas and the town's reaction. Doubt grew stronger, but pride refused to let him turn back. He told himself that leadership required strength, not popularity. He believed history would judge him more kindly than the present did. The woman watched from afar as the town's anger grew. She felt caught between her care for the rancher and her loyalty to the community. She wished he had trusted people enough to share his struggle. In her heart, she knew that this pain could have been avoided. As days passed, the divide widened. The town no longer felt united. Friends argued. Families disagreed. What had once been a peaceful place now felt tense and uncertain. Part 3 ends with the town fully aware of the decision and deeply affected by it. The rancher stands firm, surrounded by the consequences he did not fully expect. The woman, and the rest of the town, realize that what has been done cannot simply be undone, and the real cost of the decision is only beginning to show. The anger in the town no longer stayed quiet. What had once been whispered in corners now filled open spaces. People spoke freely, their voices sharp with frustration and hurt. The local meeting hall, which had usually been a calm place for small discussions, became crowded night after night. Chairs scraped against the floor, hands were raised high, and emotions spilled out without restraint. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years found themselves on opposite sides of the argument. Some believed the rancher had every right to make his choice. Others felt deeply wounded, saying rights did not erase responsibility. The real pain came from feeling ignored. Many said they would have understood his struggles if he had trusted them enough to speak openly. Silence, more than the decision itself, had broken their trust. The rancher heard about these meetings but did not attend. He stayed on his land, telling himself that showing up would only make things worse. He believed that time would calm people down and that progress always faced resistance. Still, every loud voice in town felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Simple daily tasks became difficult. Going into town for supplies felt uncomfortable. Eyes followed him as he walked through the store. Conversations stopped when he approached. The smiles he once received were gone, replaced by cold looks or quiet distance. Even people who did not speak against him seemed unsure how to act around him. The woman watched all of this with a heavy heart. She attended the meetings, listening to the pain people shared. She understood their anger. Yet she also knew the rancher was not a cruel man. He had believed he was protecting his future, but belief did not erase the damage. She felt torn, standing between a man she cared for and a town she loved. She tried once more to reach him, hoping that seeing the full effect of his choice might open his heart. When she visited the ranch, she noticed how different it felt. The land no longer carried the same peace. The noise, the movement, and the changes in the fields made it feel unfamiliar. Even to her, she spoke honestly, telling him the town was hurting badly. She said friendships were breaking and families were divided. She told him that even if the decision could not be undone, acknowledging the pain could help heal some wounds. She urged him to speak, to explain himself, to show that he cared. For a moment, he seemed shaken. His shoulders dropped slightly, and his eyes softened. He admitted that he had not expected the reaction to be this strong. He said he had thought people would be upset, but not this deeply wounded. Still, he struggled to admit fault. He feared that apologizing would mean admitting he was wrong, and that fear held him back. As days passed, the town's anger reached its peak. Signs appeared in windows. Petitions were signed. Long-time friendships were tested. The sense of unity that once defined the town felt fragile, as if it could break completely at any moment. The rancher became more isolated. Even on his land, he felt watched and judged. The pride that once gave him strength now felt heavy. He began to understand that leadership was not just about making hard choices, but also about carrying the emotional cost of those choices. At night, he walked the land alone, remembering how it used to feel. He recalled working beside his father, laughing with neighbors, and feeling proud not just of the ranch, but of his place in the community. Those memories now felt distant, like stories from another life. The woman, seeing his struggle, felt both sadness and frustration. She wished he had listened sooner, before the damage grew so deep. She knew that healing would take time. And even then, some wounds might never fully close. The town continued to argue, but beneath the anger was grief. People were grieving the loss of trust, of certainty, and of a shared future they once believed in. The rancher had not only changed the land, he had changed how people saw one another. Part 4 ends with the town standing at a breaking point. Anger, sadness, and disappointment fill the air. The rancher, once a symbol of strength and tradition, now faces the weight of isolation. The woman and the town wait, unsure if understanding and healing are still possible, or if the divide has grown too wide to cross. Time did not stop after the town reached its breaking point. Life continued. But it felt different. Slower and heavier. The anger that once burned brightly began to cool, not because the pain was gone, but because people were tired. Tired of arguing, tired of choosing sides, and tired of carrying so much disappointment. The town did not heal quickly, but it did begin to change again. This time, in quieter ways. The rancher felt this change more than anyone. The noise around his land slowly lessened, but the silence that replaced it felt even louder. He no longer heard shouting or heated debates. Yet he felt the absence of connection everywhere. The land he had worked so hard to protect now felt like a reminder of what he had lost. The success he once imagined brought little comfort. He began to notice small things he had ignored before. He noticed how empty the roads felt without friendly waves. He noticed how the local store felt colder, not because people were unkind, but because something had been broken. He noticed how alone he felt at the end of each day, standing on land that once gave him pride, but now gave him questions. One evening, after a long day, he sat on his porch and watched the sun set over the fields. The sky looked the same as it always had, but he was not the same man who used to watch it. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit something he had avoided for months. He had made his decision believing strength meant standing firm no matter what. Now he realized that strength could also mean listening, admitting mistakes, and facing uncomfortable truths. The woman had kept her distance, giving him space to think. She believed that pushing him further would only harden his heart, but when she saw him one afternoon, walking slowly across the land with his head lowered, she knew he was finally facing himself. They spoke quietly, without anger this time. He told her he had been wrong to believe he had to carry everything alone. He admitted that fear had guided him more than wisdom. He feared losing the ranch, feared failing the generations before him, and feared appearing weak. In trying to protect everything, he had damaged the one thing he never meant to lose: the trust of his community. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him something simple but powerful. She said mistakes do not define a person. How they respond to them does. She reminded him that the town was hurt, but not heartless. People wanted to be seen and heard, just as he did. Slowly, the rancher began to change how he acted. He did not expect forgiveness right away. He knew words alone would not repair what had been damaged. Instead, he began by showing up. He attended town gatherings quietly, listening more than speaking. He acknowledged people's pain without defending himself. He admitted that he should have involved the town from the beginning. At first, people were cautious. Some were still angry, others unsure if they could trust him again. But seeing him there, not as a strong figure standing above them, but as a man willing to listen, softened a few hearts. Small conversations began to happen. They were not warm or friendly at first, but they were honest. The town also began to reflect. People realized that while the rancher's choice had caused pain, the long arguments had also left scars. They saw how division had affected friendships and families. Slowly, the focus shifted from blame to rebuilding what could still be saved. Not everything could be undone. The land had changed, and some opportunities were gone forever. But new understanding began to grow in its place. People started talking about how to protect what remained of their town, how to communicate better, and how to face change together instead of apart. The rancher took responsibility where he could. He supported local efforts, helped neighbors without expecting praise, and stayed present even when it was uncomfortable. He learned that leadership was not about control, but about connection. Each small step forward felt uncertain, but it felt right. The woman watched this process with quiet hope. She knew healing was not a straight path. Some days were good, others were not, but she saw something important return to the rancher's eyes, a sense of humility and understanding that had been missing before. Over time, the town found a new balance. It was not the same as before, and it never would be. But it became something honest, shaped by lessons learned the hard way. People became more willing to speak openly, and leaders became more careful about listening. The rancher no longer stood as a symbol of pride alone. He became a reminder of how easily trust can be lost, and how slowly it can be rebuilt. His story was spoken about quietly, not with anger, but with reflection. In the end, the greatest change was not on the land, but in the hearts of those who lived around it. The town learned that progress without understanding can cause deep wounds. The rancher learned that strength without empathy leads to isolation. As the seasons passed, life continued. The fields changed colors. New routines formed, and the town moved forward. The pain did not disappear, but it softened, becoming part of a shared memory rather than an open wound. The story closes not with perfect peace, but with growth. A man who learned too late that listening matters. A town that learned the cost of silence, and a reminder that even when mistakes cannot be erased, honesty, patience, and effort can still lead to healing.